Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing Day 2 of the 2025 NHL entry draft for the San Jose Sharks, which comprised rounds 2 through 7. Unlike the first day, where it takes a pretty long time to actually get through those first 32 picks, the second day of the draft is a lot quicker and more streamlined. The NHL isn't as concerned about trying to make a whole show of the situation, and so pick after pick comes in rather quickly. And the Sharks had the first selection of the day at 33rd overall, which was likely a very popular asset, at least for a few hours, because all 31 other NHL general managers finish out their first round, have the chance to digest how things went, and then the chance to sleep on it, and then wake up this next day thinking there's still a player or two on the board that they really want for their organization. So I imagine Mike Grier was spending the morning working the phones, fielding offers, but decided to hold on to this 33rd overall pick anyway, and who could blame him for that? This is basically a selection that is an extension of the first round. You're usually able to pick up players who are of that first round caliber here that managed to slip through the cracks. It is the exact situation that played out last year when the Sharks picked up Igor Sultanov at 33rd overall, which ended up being a really, really great selection based on how things have gone this past season. So the Sharks, another opportunity for that. I had originally thought they'd go for a defenseman here, a right-handed defenseman, which fits an important need within their organization here with Blake Fiddler. He was also one of the better players still available on the board, expected to have gone in the early to mid-20s, but there was a chance that they could go in a different direction with another best player available type of pick, someone like Malcolm Spence, who could have perhaps even gone in the teens of the first round, but had somehow managed to find his way to be available at 33. But the Sharks decide to go a little bit against what people may have been thinking with a bit of a surprise choice of Simon Wang, somewhat of a reach here at number 33. I do know he was a rather popular player because of the kind of skill set that he does bring to the table. I got many questions about whether or not I thought the Sharks would actually draft Simon Wang, but I'd originally believed he might be more so in that 53rd overall range. However, Mike Grier did not want to take the risk that he would be taken within those 20 next picks and locks him in at that 33rd position. I actually do find this pick to be very interesting and actually rather exciting because it is the type of risk that I was hoping Mike Grier would take. I had made a video a few weeks ago discussing who the Sharks could grab at 30 or 33, and I'd mentioned that the Sharks are in a position right now where they have such a deep prospect pool that there was an opportunity to really take a big swing at a high risk, high reward type of prospect, and this is the exact description that Simon Wang actually fits, because he ends up being one of the most intriguing prospects available at the draft here this year. This is for a few reasons. First of which, he actually has a very cool and interesting narrative behind him. He now becomes, at this 33rd overall selection, the highest ever drafted Chinese-born player in NHL history. On top of this, he had really only started playing hockey at a serious level a few years ago and has made significant strides in such a small amount of time in comparison to many of the other draft players who have likely had a hockey stick in their hand for 10 to 15 years. Simon Wang, there was more of a heavy commitment quite recently, at least speaking in these type of hockey style of terms. He spent the start of this year in the OJHL, then made the jump to the OHL with the Oshawa Generals, and this is a very notable team actually, because you can recall that the London Knights were the OHL champions this season, Sam Dickinson, Casper Helton helping lead the way there, but the team that they had defeated in the final round of the OHL playoffs was actually Oshawa. So for Sharks executives and for Mike Grier, who were watching that particular series, they were likely also keeping an eye on Simon Wang being that draft eligible prospect, and obviously they liked what they saw. And what you're seeing here is a player with a ton of size. You know, Sam Dickinson is a pretty physically imposing 6'3", Simon Wang stands 6'6", but he also is a very, very mobile defenseman. He can skate like the wing, he moves exceptionally well, which is a pretty rare combination of size and speed that we see Mike Grier is a huge fan of. Actually, a very similar style of makeup that Sam Dickinson has. And similar to Sam Dickinson, but even more so, Simon Wang is also a very raw prospect, extremely rough around the edges. There are still significant developments that do need to be made for him to be an NHL player, which means he's much more of a project type of guy, not someone who you expect to see in the NHL next season or even the year after that. You may be eyeing or more so the 28-29 season before Simon Wang has a real opportunity of being that type of NHL player for yourself. But the interesting thing here is that the sky is the limit for this particular player. You're not locking in someone who you really only suspect to ever become a bottom pairing defenseman. This is a player who could be a middle pairing guy. This is a player who could even perhaps be a top pairing guy. There's just so little known about him, and he's made such big move ups over these last few years to find himself at this 33rd overall position. You don't 100% know where he'll finally end up landing. There is just as much of an equal chance of becoming that first pairing defenseman as there is for him to never really become an NHL player at all. So he's going to be someone over these next few seasons to really try to keep an eye on. Next year, he will still be in the OHL. This past season, in the 50-plus games he played between the playoffs and the regular season, he really only had a handful of assists, very little offensive production. So that's one of the first key steps that he will have to take if he truly wants to ever become an NHL player here. And so that is going to be someone who the Sharks will be very, very much intrigued with going forward here within the Sharks prospect pool. Again, a very high risk, high reward type of player. There is a lot of upside here with him. Then at the 53rd overall selection, this was the draft pick acquired from the Ottawa Senators in the Fabian Zetterlund trade, so perhaps an opportunity for redemption based on who they took, and it ended up being a very solid pick. I would say Cole McKinney here, a centerman from the U.S. National Development Program. He was actually viewed as one of, if not the best and most consistent players on that team. To be fair, it was a relatively weak draft class for the U.S. National Development Program, but still Cole McKinney viewed rather highly, someone who could have potentially gone very late in the first round, maybe in the 30s, but that the Sharks were able to swoop in and grab at 53. Not a player who has a significant amount of offensive upside, probably not someone who you ever see becoming a first or maybe even second liner in the NHL, but more so in that third to fourth line range because he can chip in offensively, but also plays that in-your-face style of game. He's willing to get to the front of the net. He's willing to be physical. It's actually kind of funny to see because the other major asset acquired in that Fabian Zetterlund trade was Zach Ostapchuk, and Cole McKinney plays a very similar style of game to Zach Ostapchuk. And so this is Mike Greer doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on trying to find a third or fourth line center for this organization moving forward. You're pretty much set in the top six with a combination of Celebrini, Will Smith, and now Michael Misa, but you need that help within that bottom six to truly bring a team to the next level, and Cole McKinney absolutely could provide exactly that. You're looking more so in the 2 to 3 year range before he actually makes much of an impact in the NHL, but definitely a player who could become something for this team. Then we move on to the 95th overall pick. This is one of the last picks of the third round, and this is a good time to mention that as you are getting deeper here into the draft, you are starting to pick players who have some upside, but also some major weaknesses that are preventing them from ever actually being higher up in the draft, especially this year, which was viewed as a draft without a significant amount of depth. Every single player picked from this point onward do have some major downsides and weaknesses to their game, whether that be their lack of offensive upside, maybe some issues defensively, maybe some attitude issues, maybe they lack a ton of size. These are all individual problems that basically teams are just hoping the player is able to overcome on their way towards the NHL. But to put this into perspective, this is now my 7th year of covering the Sharks draft, going all the way back to 2019. If we go through those 7 years, the player who has played the most amount of games in the NHL, drafted in the third round or later, was a player who played just 21 games. That is not a significant amount, so it is tough to find a good NHL player at this position of the draft. It's basically attempting to find a needle in a haystack, not an easy thing to pull off. But to move past some of the more pessimistic view here, we have at the 95th overall selection, Teddy Mutrin, a player who also played at the U.S. National Development Program with Cole McKinney. The Sharks and the NHL considered him to be a center, but it seems as though he played the wing the majority of this season. Very similar style of player to Cole McKinney, not a player who has a significant amount of offensive upside to be a top 6 guy, but someone who's more so viewed in that bottom 6 style of role, power forward type of player. But as I always mention when discussing these types of bottom 6 players, they can still be extremely valuable for your organization. The NHL, it is a copycat league, and so teams are always looking at what the successful organizations are doing and trying to emulate that. The Florida Panthers are the back-to-back Stanley Cup champions, and so a lot of people are looking towards them and seeing how can we make sure that we are the next Florida Panthers team. And obviously at the top of their lineup, they have a tremendous amount of talent in the case of Barkov and Tkachuk and Reinhardt and Verhaeghe and Bennett and all of these types of players, but many of them are also guys who can play on the edge and can bring that physical type of aspect. But as you move later down into the lineup, they also have some key contributors, even just onto their fourth line. A group of players that play maybe 5, 6, 7 minutes of ice time, but are still very important. You ask head coach Paul Maurice of the Florida Panthers, he would probably say that the Panthers don't win the Stanley Cup this season without the contributions of those fourth liners, guys like AJ Greer or former San Jose Shark Jona Gadjevich. So having Teddy Mutrin become that player for the San Jose Sharks potentially within the next couple of years, a guy who's not going to pot many goals and points, he's not going to light up the scoreboard, maybe we'll only have 3 or 4 points during an important playoff run, but those are the types of 3 or 4 points that can get you over the hump and win you extremely important playoff series games. So not to say that this is someone who will pan out for the San Jose Sharks, but there's a possibility there, definitely a higher floor type of player. Then at 115th overall, we have another defenseman, though he also plays on the left side out of Russia. And bear with me for this name pronunciation. We have Ilyas Magomed Sultanov. That's going to definitely be a mouthful if he ever actually makes it to the NHL for Randy Hahn. This is like a couple of steps above Shakir Mukhamadullin, which was already relatively difficult. As you know, I've heard multiple different NHL commentators, not Randy Hahn, but around the league, who have had issues pronouncing that name for sure. This is a player who, kind of like with Mutrin, kind of like with McKinney, doesn't have a tremendous amount of upside. You're not viewing this guy as a future top pairing or even middle pairing defenseman for your team. If he manages to pan out, which is a pretty big if, it's more so as that bottom pairing defenseman. There is not much offense to his game, but he got some decent size, standing 6'3". He moves relatively well, not exceptionally so, but he can certainly get around the ice. His defensive instincts are pretty good. His physicality, he is willing to throw the body, which is valued, especially by Mike Greer. So this is a player who is an interesting piece to add to the Sharks prospect pool. Whether or not he actually works out is a huge question mark, of course, when you're drafting here in the 4th round, but if it does, you've got yourself a decent maybe number 6 or number 7 defenseman in your team. It would be a few years out, however. Then we move on to the 124th overall pick, where we have yet another left-handed defenseman here in Zachary Sharp, and he is a very interesting player because he is an overager. The way things work in the NHL is that during your 17 to 18 years of age season, that is your first year of draft eligibility. Sometimes players are 17 if they have like a July, August birthday, otherwise most of them are 18 years old. That's the first time you can be taken in the draft, but you actually have another couple of years after that, so at 19 or even 20 years of age. And the Sharks, they have occasionally, Mike Greer has drafted these overager type of players if he really believes in them. Last season, Nate Miskey was that type of guy. The year before that, Eric Polkamp was an overager. But the thing about Sharp that actually differentiates him a little bit is that both Polkamp and Miskey were 19 years of age when they were drafted. Sharp is actually 20, so he is in the final year of draft eligibility. And this is a pretty big deal because, as we know, every single season is a huge opportunity for development. And when you draft a player at 18 years of age, they have a pretty significant runway of 4 to 5 seasons before you would really hope for them to make a jump to the NHL. When you're drafting a player at 20 years of age, obviously that time is heavily shortened. Now, Sharp was playing in the NCAA this past season as a freshman with, I believe, Western Michigan. He got 9 points in the 40-ish games that they ended up playing, so not significant offensive production, but he does have some decent offensive instincts here. This is a situation where, I personally probably wouldn't have drafted this player. However, I will defer to Mike Greer. He has obviously watched significantly more tape of this player, and his scouting staff has watched significantly more tape of this player than I have, and so I will believe that Mike Greer is seeing something that every other team has not seen for each of these last couple of seasons and for the first 123 picks of this year as well. Hopefully he can work out, but there is a big journey ahead of him. He needs to take some quite significant strides in his game over the next year or two if he wants to become an NHLer at some point. When it comes to the 150th overall pick, also an overager, but not by 2 years, only by the single year. That is Max Hasey here, a centerman who was playing in the BCHL this season. That is the league right below the WHL, so not exactly the most prestigious of leagues, but he put up some okay point totals. He'll be making the jump to the WHL next season. The thing is that would be considered his D+2 year technically, and usually for players playing in the WHL or the CHL in general, in their D+2 year, if they are wanting to become good NHL players in the future, you are usually expecting some pretty significant offensive production, and to suspect that Max Hasty will be able to do that in just his first season in the WHL is relatively hard to believe. But again, it's a situation like with Zachary Sharp where I will defer to Mike Grier and hope that he knows exactly what he is doing. He has done some very good jobs of drafting in the past, and so hopefully it does work out. And then finally, we have the 210th draft pick here. Down in the 7th round, right near the end of the draft, the Sharks pick up Richard Galant, also a U.S. National Development Team program player. This is the third of this day 2 that the Sharks actually went with, so clearly a trend there for Mike Grier and the San Jose Sharks. And the thing here about Galant, the big thing that was holding him back is actually his size. Now, for this year, Mike Grier has drafted almost every single player at 6 feet or above. The same was the case last season. Galant is that one exception, standing at just 5'8". So this is a risky type of swing that we rarely see from Grier, but when we do, it's usually in a pretty good spot. Luca Cagnoni was standing at just 5'9" back in 2023 when he was a 4th round draft pick of the San Jose Sharks, and as we know now, it has worked out very, very well thus far for that player, and so maybe Galant could be that type of guy. His offensive numbers with the U.S. National Development Team program is actually rather solid. He had some good production. He played at the under-18s with Team USA and actually outscored both Cole McKenna and Teddy Mutrin, those 2nd and 3rd round picks of the San Jose Sharks this year, by putting up 6 points in 7 games, including 5 goals. So he has the offensive creativity, he has the ability to put the puck in the net, but as I said, that big obstacle is his lack of size. How is he going to be able to manage to find his way in the NHL when players are much bigger and much stronger than him? It's going to be a kind of a flyer type of player here in the 7th round, and I actually am very much in support of that. When you're picking in like the 6th or the 7th round, the likelihood of these players ever actually making much of an NHL impact is extremely, extremely small. Again, to go back in the future or in the past here for the San Jose Sharks, the last 7th rounder that they have had who has actually played a significant amount of NHL games, so more than just a handful here or there, was Joakim Ryan back in 2012. That is a pretty long time. So to take a swing on someone who has good upside, even if you don't think it's ever going to actually work out due to some pretty big obstacles in his way, him being 5'8", I definitely do support. So Mike Grier opens up the 2nd day with a high-risk, high-reward player. He ends the 2nd day with another high-risk, high-reward, medium-reward, I guess I should say, type of player. And it caps off a pretty good all-around draft here for the San Jose Sharks. They picked up some really highly talented players, some solid bottom 6 type of guys. And so we now move forward into free agency and over into the new year, and we'll see how the Sharks can do and how these players begin to pan out. Class dismissed.